Hi, this is Comet Troy coming to you from Linden Camp, 5 minutes southeast of Linden, Tennessee, where I own 35 acres of raw, undeveloped land that I'm developing into a small boutique RV park. I recently released a 4-week series on land clearing and on my construction video series, and the first steps to clear this land here at Linden Camp. And in week 1, I talked about land clearing 101. There's a chapter in there called that, and then I didn't really go into any details of exactly what land clearing 101 was. So this is, I guess, week 1.5 of that series to fill in that chapter. We're going to be talking today about the 7 methods that are used to clear land in a forest, and I'm going to talk about what those methods are. I'm going to explain a little bit of what they look like, how they work, and then we're going to talk about the pros and cons of each of the 7 methods. After I explain the 7 methods of clearing land and the pros and cons, I'm going to sum it all up at the end and put some verbs and some nouns in my sentences and tell you exactly which tool to use for the job. This is my opinion based upon my experience. You may have different opinions, and if you do, I'd love to hear about them in the comments, so let me know. Quickly, we'll talk about the 7 methods just as a table of contents, and there'll be a chapter for each one of these. But the first one, of course, is your traditional axe or chainsaw mechanical method. The next one that we're going to talk about is bulldozing or pushing over trees. The next method we're going to talk about is doing a track hoe to pluck the trees out of the ground. The 4th method we're going to talk about is forestry mulching. The 5th method that we're going to talk about is forestization of a large logging company that would come in. Number 6 would be chemical methods to remove trees from land. And then, of course, the last method, which isn't something that that we're in control of, nature. Nature has the ability to clear land as well, whether we like it or not in many cases. At the end, we're going to sum it all up from a scenario perspective rather than a method. So I'm going to lay out some scenarios and what method I would recommend to clear land in a quiz type format. So I hope you'll enjoy that. Stick around, you won't want to miss this. I think you'll find some helpful information if you're clearing land yourself, and the pros and cons of each of these methods should help you choose which is the best method. Now, having said that, you can also use multiple methods. I've actually used 2 different methods when I Linden Camp clearing methods here. You don't have to just pick one. Let's get right into it. So let's talk about the chainsaw or axe method, the mechanical method to remove trees from land. I don't think I really need to show too much of it, so I'm going to tell a little personal story instead. I think everybody knows how to cut a tree down with a chainsaw, and I don't really need to show a video of that. But I'm a full-time RVer now, and several years ago, I sold all my belongings, and if it didn't fit in the RV, I sold it, gave it away, donated it, or whatever. So I didn't want to get a storage locker for any tools. So to make a long story short, I ended up selling I had a nice still 18-inch bar, an 029 Farm Boss, and I had that thing for over a decade, used it all the time. It was awesome. And I ended up selling it at an estate sale, had a $150 price tag on it, was probably worth $300. Nobody bought it. The last day of the sale, things were marked 50% off, and some lucky sucker got that saw for $75. Today I'm kicking myself. I didn't know I'd be buying a woods, and that saw would have been handy. So after I went full-time RVing, though, I did buy an electric chainsaw. It was actually a pole saw. And, friends and family say, yeah, come on out, bring the RV, we got plenty of space for you. And I get out of there, and their driveway is just canopied with trees that are high enough off the ground they can get their car or truck through. How this saw would do on on cutting a stump off, as you can see here in the background, and it actually surprised me. It did a nice job. Also, I'm going to try to cut the root balls off with my tree trimming saw. So we'll see how this is going to work. It may not. I'm going to get a big boy saw eventually. I just don't have it yet. So when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. Well, ta-da! But it was time for a big boy saw. I had to trade in my battery operated pole saw for, and guess what, another Stihl Farm Boss. So my first one, let me correct that, my first saw had a 20-inch bar. This one has an 18-inch bar, and it works very well for this type of project. So that's a little story that I just wanted to share with you. So the pros and cons I think are pretty obvious. You know, let's talk about the pros first. So number one, it's it's pretty economical and easy for any for a homeowner to use. For $400 to $500, you can get yourself a nice chainsaw. If you don't have a budget for a chainsaw, you can use an axe. I suppose you could probably even use a steak knife if you wanted to. And it's satisfying to cut the trees down. It's good exercise. The cons, of course, are it's very slow, labor intensive, time consuming, and of course the biggest con of safety. We've all heard stories about a neighbor or a friend who's been operating a chainsaw and cut into their thigh, or the thing kicked back up into their face, or they didn't have a cherry picker to get up into a large tree, so they had a ladder up into that tree to take the tree down in pieces, and fell off the ladder, chainsaw falling behind them, running. And of course, there's Wild E. Coyote standing on the wrong side of the branch, chainsawing it to get Bugs Bunny. And so those are the cons of the of the chainsaw mechanical method. So let's get into the next method. The next forestry method I'd like to talk about is pushing the trees over. This is typically done with a bulldozer, and as you can see here, the bulldozer just gets behind the tree, puts the blade real low. You don't have to push real high on these trees, so they just lift the blade probably about 2 feet off the ground, and they have plenty of power in these dozers to knock these trees over, especially these loblolly pines. There's no taproot, so these trees just look like kind of weeds, and it's amazing that how fast they can take trees out with a bulldozer. Typically, when they do land clearing with a bulldozer, they'll knock over 1 or 2 trees at a time into a bunch of trees, 10 trees, 12 trees, all with the root balls kind of facing the bulldozer, and then they'll all together use the bulldozer to push that bunch of trees to where they need them. A lot of times they're pushed off into the forest where they can decay naturally and complete the circle of life. They may be pushed towards a burn pit, which is what we did in week 1 of our land clearing video. So let's just talk about the pros and cons of that. The pros, of course, is it's very efficient to to clear land with a bulldozer. I mean, you can with a chainsaw I could maybe do 10 trees a day. A bulldozer can do 10 trees in 5 minutes. So do the math. I mean, you can literally clear acres and acres of forestry with a bulldozer quick. So the other advantage is that typically the root ball comes out, when the tree is knocked over. So you're not left, having to deal with, with the stump or root after you have the bulldozer in there. Of course, the cons are it's pretty expensive. You can have, you'll typically pay, in today's rates, 2022, for a fairly large to mid-sized bulldozer, you'll pay $170 to $200 an hour with an operator. Multiply that times, 8 hours, you're looking at, $1,200 to $1,300, $1,400 a day. But, you can clear out several acres of land in that time period. So I think that's probably the biggest con. I guess, another one is bulldozers are big. So, you're not going to be very selective in what you can knock over and what you can't. You're not going to be able to go in and say, well, I just, I want that tree there in the middle taken out. The bulldozer has to get back behind it in order to push it over. And a lot of the other trees, that I didn't take down next to where the bulldozer is operating, they get abrasions and skins, their bark taken off of them. I have an oak tree over here that I wanted to save that's got a big gash in the side of it. It's just collateral damage of using a bulldozer in the woods. So if you care about every tree and you want to make sure that you don't damage some of them, then bulldozer is probably not your best method. The next method I'd like to talk about is a track hoe. That's kind of the nickname for it. It's called an excavator. It's got tracks like you'd have on an army tank, and then it's got a big arm that that can reach around, and that's what we use here at Linden Camp. Here's some examples of a track hoe in operation. And it's just amazing how fast the track hoe operates as well. With the track hoe, you can pluck trees out of the ground, and as you can see here, it's just amazing. If you just let your mind wander a little bit, you can just envision that this is like pulling weeds out of a garden. But these are trees, 70-foot loblolly trees without a taproot, obviously. So that's how an excavator pulls trees out. Now, some of the pros of an excavator is it's very versatile. So a track hoe has a long arm, and it can really reach out to into the woods, down in the hollers, to get some problem trees without having to go all the way down in there, where a bulldozer has to kind of get back behind it and push up, where a track hoe can kind of reach down in and reach out and touch you, if you will, and just pull the tree out. Another pro of the track hoe is, while we already talked about the versatility, is it's got that the bucket. And most of them have what they call a hydraulic thumb, which is a pincher, so they can actually pick up logs, move them around, build a campfire with it. It's got teeth on the bucket, so it can get roots and stuff out of the ground. So a lot of pros to track hoe removal of land, and that's probably my favorite way to do land clearing, or massive land clearing, just because it is the most flexible, and it's very similar in cost to what a bulldozer does. The $170 to $200 an hour range with an operator. So again, you're in the $1,200 to $1,500 a day kind of range based upon today's prices. And obviously that's a con, is the price. It does cost, but you really got to look at it. Compared to a chainsaw, is it really more expensive? No, it's probably cheaper or less expensive, and because you can just do so much more. So you got to pick the right tool for the job. The other con that the Bulldozer had was, it was hard to, pull trees out, or, push trees out in the middle of a forest, where a backhoe can easily, pick it up and, pull them out, and you can be more selective with the backhoe of tree removal. So that is by far my favorite method of tree removal for, larger acreage. Now the next method we're going to talk about is forestry mulching. When I bought this land, I had no idea what forestry mulching was. I had some visions in my head, that truck pulling a wood chipper behind it, that they used to clear branches from roadside. You can get personal wood chippers for your yard if you want to make your own mulch, and feeding branches in, like in the first chapter we talked about, the mechanical method with using a chainsaw or axe, and then you have the canopy, you could use a mulcher for that. But no, that's not what I'm talking about with forestry mulching. And here behind me you'll see a forestry mulching head mounted on a bobcat or a skid steer, whatever you want to call it, and it's hydraulically driven, and it's very heavy, and it takes, I actually heard it winding up to speed, and it takes a little while for those heads to get up to speed. They got carbide teeth on them, and I've seen two different varieties of forestry mulching. There's a head mounted onto a bobcat, and the bobcat will hit the tree in the middle, and then the top half will fall down. Then they'll just take the head and just take the tree down to the ground, and then they can mulch up, limbs and stuff that are laying on the ground, so they never really have to get out of their equipment, and they can, go through a forest and turn it into a beautiful bed of wood chips. Now the other method is, again, a track hoe, but instead of having a bucket on the end of the track hoe arm, they put a forestry mulcher on there. And these forestry mulchers, because of the track hoe reach, it can reach up, a good 20, 30, 40 feet, depending upon the size of the excavator and the reach of the arm, and just, take a tree, down in like, seconds. I don't have any personal video of that, so I don't have any of that video to actually show. All the video that I have in my videos is all content that I've personally recorded. So let's talk about the pros and cons of forestry mulching. Number one, it's aesthetically pleasing very quickly. You can get an area cleared, and it's a great wow factor. A lot of land developers will use this method before presentation for sale to the public, and it can really open up some views really quickly, and really makes the curb appeal of the land very exciting. Number two, if it's I guess even a track hoe mounted forestry mulcher, but if it's a skid steer forestry mulcher, it can really get in between the trees. It's great for taking care of underbrush. So if you want to go in there and leave the big tree standing, but get rid of all the shrubs and stuff, I think it's an excellent tool for that. The large excavating forestry mulcher, not so much for underbrush, but if you want to take large trees down, that would be a good way to selectively do that with a large forestry mulcher mounted on a track hoe. And the other pro, I guess, is it's relatively fast. I would argue it's not the fastest method, probably not the best tool to do large acreage clearing. But some people have done it and love it. The cons are, in my opinion, it's still fairly pricey. Not probably as well. You can get skid steer time, bobcat time for, I would say, $150 an hour. Multiply that out, and then if you want a forestry mulching head, that's usually an extra cost. So you're looking at the 150 and up, $170 an hour. So you end up with a forestry mulcher, you end up about at the same price point as a bulldozer or a excavator. The other con that I want to bring up with forestry mulching is it leaves the stumps. So the stumps, go down to ground level, which is fine if you just want to, clear some underbrush in your woods and you don't care about the stumps. But if you're going to be clearing land using a forestry mulching method for a build site or driveways or paths or camping areas or whatever, you probably you're going to want to get rid of the stumps, and so that's going to require a different attachment. There's a kind of a claw that can go in and get those root balls out on a bobcat that are right at the ground level. They don't need to have a trunk to attach onto. But it's I call it a con because it's an extra step you have to do. So I believe that forestry mulch is already slower than a track hoe or bulldozer, and then which gets the root ball in one pass. But with a forestry mulcher on a bobcat or a track hoe, you need to either switch out the heads or have a different machine ready or a different operator that's going to come through and get rid of the root balls. So that would be a con. Of course, the cost, again, it's up there pricey as far as having an operator on site. And the other con that I think is a lot of people don't remove the root ball, and a lot of times you'll end up having trees grow out of that stump. So you'll end up having suckers come up from the roots. So if you're going to do forestry mulching of underbrush, you're going to have to plan to do it on a regular basis, and you're going to have to keep doing it forever while you want to maintain the property. So it's probably not my favorite method, the forestry mulching, just because of that. Now, if you have a smaller area, and you're going to remove the root balls and that, fine, then I can get behind it. The chips look real nice, and I don't have to keep mowing it. But just be aware that there's a lot of trees out there that will root sucker, and this is a huge con, I guess, really, of any mechanical removal method of a trees. And this would apply to chainsaws. This would apply to bulldozing, track hoe, and forestry mulching. Is that if you mechanically remove a tree that has a vast root system, such as a tree of heaven or the princess tree that I have here on my property, and if you mechanically remove that tree, the tree is going to detect that it's had a major wound to it, and it's going to send up tons of root suckers in its place to try to get nourishment to those roots. So that's really the forestry mulching method, and it has its places. All these methods have a place. So let's talk about the next method. All right, so we've gone through 4 of the 7 methods. I just want to take a moment just to encourage you all to subscribe, like, comment, ring the bell on my channel if you like this content. So with that, let's continue on with the next 3 methods of land clearing, and then I'll sum it all up at the end. The next method we're going to talk about is hiring a company to come in and clear your land, and they'll typically pay you for this. There's actually 3 different methods for for clearing land, from a commercial entity coming in. Clear cutting is one of them, and that's probably the most popular or the most known out there, where a logging company comes in and brings all their trucks and cutting equipment, the trees out, and there's also select cutting or selection cutting, where you can hire a company to come in and take out the mature trees and on a selective basis and leave the smaller and medium trees in place. I'm not sure whether you still get paid for that, because that sounds like a lot of work. I suppose if you have high valued trees, it's probably a good way to go. There's a third method, which I don't remember right now, called habitat or something, where you just knock the trees down and leave them there for. The pros of this method obviously are it's probably the least expensive way to clear land, and you get paid for it. Another pro is it's extremely quick. They have machines like this that will go and grab the tree, and then there's a cutting blade on the bottom that spins around, and in one motion they can cut the tree off and carry it away and take it to the machine that strips all the branches off of it and load it onto a logging truck. It's pretty amazing. Of course, the cons of clear cutting specifically is it's an all or nothing thing. You can't tell the wood processing company, well, leave this tree here and leave that tree there, and I mean, you can probably do that to a certain extent, marking them off, but they're going to want to come in and just take the whole area, so they don't have to be working around trees. It slows them down. And that another con is the nature floor. None of the bushes and stuff and the small wildlife is preserved because of there's they take it right, there's trucks driving over it and it just won't survive. And of course, the third con is the animals. Any animals that lived in there no longer have homes. So, that's a thing to be concerned about as well. Out here, it's probably not so much of a deal because there's so much woodlands and so many areas for the animals to go. They'll just leave that particular property and go into neighbors' properties, such as mine or yours. And then beauty's in the eye of the beholder. A lot of people probably think it's not very aesthetically pleasing to look at after land has been clear cutted. You just have barren land, there's no trees on it. Other people will look at it for the different perspective and say, look at the views that I have here. I can see a half a mile, I can see a mile onto the next hilltop. That's beauty to other people. So it's all what your cup of tea is, I guess. So next, let's talk about the chemical method of tree removal. A lot of people are probably raising their eyes right now. You see all the concern on TV and Hollywood about using chemicals on our lands, and it soaks into the rivers and into the environment and the groundwater, and that is definitely a concern. But that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about here is it takes a very small amount of Triclopyr, 3 or 4, and you just apply some to the bark of a tree you want to get rid of. And larger trees, you can use an axe and squirt a little bit of the chemical into the side of in the side of the tree, so it gets soaked in. I think it's called the cambium layer down into the roots, and it will kill the tree. And it only takes a thimbleful of Triclopyr to do this. And Triclopyr 3 is a water-based chemical for this. Triclopyr 4 is a more of an oil-based, so you can use either one. It's like a thimbleful, very selective for a tree we want to get rid of. We're using it on Tree of Heaven and the Princess Tree, which are both invasive trees that are native to China. How they got here on this land, I'll never know. I mean, this land has pretty much been vacant and just been used for hunting for, I'm guessing, hundreds of years, and there's no civilization really close to it. But somehow we have invasive trees from China here on this land. If anyone knows how they would get to a remote area like this, let me know in the comments, because I'm really curious. And the problem with these invasive trees, the Tree of Heaven and the Princess trees, you can't use a mechanical method to remove them, like the first 5 methods that were in this video, because they will just root sucker. So if you cut the tree down, you'll get 20 more in its place. And Tree of Heavens especially can branch out, pun intended, 50 feet. 50 feet, I'm not sure if it's diameter, radius, but it doesn't really matter. It just, the roots will span a long way. So if I cut down a Tree of Heaven here, I'll get root suckers in a 50-foot radius around this tree, and then I'll have 20, 30, 40 of them to deal with, which I am dealing with in some of the cases here. So here's some Tree of Heaven I treated 2 weeks ago. The leaves are starting to turn yellow. I don't think it's the fall, the natural fall foliage change, because there's obviously a couple of Trees of Heaven I missed that still are very dark green leaves. So it's working. Can't wait to see what it looks like in another 2 weeks. Let's talk about the pros of a chemical method. Is it's very easy and inexpensive. You don't even need a chainsaw. You need a hatchet though, if you're going to use the hack and squirt method. So it's fast, it's efficient. Well, depends upon what your parameters are as far as efficiency goes. It's efficient from a treating perspective, in that I don't have to take the tree down or process it. I can just go and with a squirt bottle, or I've seen some videos online where someone bought a dish sponge that had handle, where you put the dish soap in the handle with a cap on it, and you can put Triclopyr in there and then just run it up and down the bark towards the bottom, where you're just applying just the right amount of chemical to the bark. The cons, of course, are the chemical concern of the land. I mean, even though it's a small amount in using the hack and squirt method or the basal bark method, it's still putting chemicals on the land. So, but there's a trade-off. You gotta really look at the options and figure out whether the trade-off is worth it. The other con is it's very slow. It can take a year or two to kill a tree. They say within a month you might start seeing the tree wilting a little bit, and then the second year you may have to reapply it. So it's not a quick and dirty chemical isn't a quick and dirty method to remove trees. That's the chemical method and the pros and cons of the chemical method. And the last tree removal method I want to talk about is nature, and we don't really have a whole lot of control over this. The man upstairs, or whatever is your person you answer to, decides what's going to happen from a nature perspective. Land has been cleared of trees from fire, from floods, from insects, from, I think those are the main 3. So fire probably being the main one, earthquakes, whatever. I'm not really going to talk about pros and cons to this, because it's not something that we decide to do. It's in control of nature. With the exception that burning, controlled burning. A lot of times in forestry, large forests, they'll do controlled burns of the underbrush, because that's what causes forest fires. It seems kind of counterintuitive to have a fire to prevent a fire, but if you can burn the underbrush and not have it get out of control. And I'm not recommending this. I don't know anything about it. It's very dangerous. Don't do it. But oh no, this isn't good. The fire has gotten outside of my fire pit. Well, gotta grab the rake. And we've all seen, you know, people burning their ditches in the fall too of grass, or maybe it was in the spring that they do that, where they, you know, they start their ditches on fire in a controlled burn fashion. Again, very dangerous. Whenever you're, you know, burning things out in nature, you know, it can get away from you really quick. So not advocating or recommending that whatsoever, but some people have used, you know, use fire as a way to, you know, control forests. All right, time to put it all together. We're going to have a little bit of fun. We're going to do a quiz type format. So get out a piece of paper and a pencil. We're going to test your knowledge to see what you learned. I want to clear a build site for a house, driveway, you know, parking area, maybe some yard, you know, 1, 2, maybe 3 acres. What would be the best method to, you know, to clear the trees? Answer: I would start with the chemical method. I would identify any of the root suckering trees that, you know, will shoot up root suckers, and I would apply a chemical treatment to those root suckering trees 30 days before I wanted to clear the land, and I'd wait to see signs of them starting to wilt and wither away, because you're either going to have to deal with it now or later. And obviously that's an optional step, but that's what I would recommend first is, you know, applying Triclopyr to root suckering trees and vines to get rid of them. And then I would definitely have a backhoe come in, or an excavator or track hoe, whatever you want to call it, after 30 days and pluck all the trees out, you know, take care of them that way. And then, you know, potentially even a bulldozer. If I was going to, you know, have some grading done or some work, you know, some dirt work as they call it, the professionals call it dirt work, I would also have a bulldozer there to you know, to do that dirt work. So you know, if that operator is sitting around sometimes, you know, waiting for some trees to be cleared, you know, they could you know, pitch in a hand and use the dozer to, you know, to help clear some of those trees away as well. Question 2. Here in Tennessee, when you run overhead electric lines, the electric company requires you to clear what's called right-of-way. They want all the trees removed, you know, underneath those power lines so they don't grow up into the power lines. And here in Tennessee, and specifically in Perry County, the electric company requires you to have 20 feet on each side of those electric lines. So you have to have a 40-foot swath for, you know, clearing for overhead lines. So what methods would you use to do that right-of-way clearing? And I would identify the root suckers and, you know, apply the chemical method, wait 30 days, and then it becomes a little bit of a trick question. There's a second question that you have to ask yourself: is that right-of-way part of a driveway, or is it you know, part of a woods that you're not going to be, you know, using as a driveway? So in my case here at Linden Camp, I'm planning on running some overhead lines down the side of my driveway. So half of the right-of-way, you know, on one side of the line is 20 feet is driveway, which I would use an excavator to clear the trees, a bulldozer to grade, you know, grade the land. And then on the wood side, you know, it's not in the driveway, I would use forestry mulching, either, you know, on a skid steer or a track hoe head. if it's hilly, to reach out there and take the trees down and mulch them in place. Of course, if it's not a lot of right-of-way clearing, then I would probably use the chainsaw method and just go out there and hack the trees down, leave the stumps in place, and that's all they need for right-of-way clearing. They don't need the stumps removed for right-of-way clearing. You only need to remove the stumps if it's going to be a driveway. Obviously, it's not going to be a building, because you're going to want to have the building away from any power lines anyway. So mainly driveways is the consideration there. Question number 3. As I was walking my property, I have a lot of pines here, 60, 70, 80 foot loblolly pines that pretty much are taller than everything else. I noticed a group of oak trees, some really cool oak trees that are inside of those pine trees, and they're not getting sufficient sunlight. So I'd like to open up that area and give the oaks priority. What method or methods would I use there? In that case, I would again use the chemical method to get rid of any root suckering trees or vines. And then I would probably, if it's a smaller area, I would use the chainsaw method and selectively cut a few of the larger pine trees out of the way. I can control the fall, and with ropes and chains and stuff to not hurt the trees, and surgically remove them with the chainsaw method. If I had a larger area, I could potentially get a track hoe in there, but you have cost, and of course track hoes are big, so it really depends. I would use the chainsaw method or track hoe to clear those trees out around the oaks. I suppose you could even use the chemical method, and that would eventually kill the tree, and then the canopy or the foliage way up on top would be dead, and that would also let sunlight in. So that would be a method, but probably not my preference. I recently put in a septic tank, and I had to put in a large area for where the field lines are going to go, or the drain field, or whatever you want to call it. So what type of land clearing would you use for a septic tank and field line area? In this case, again, I would use the chemical method and get rid of any root suckering or vines ahead of time, 30 days. And then I would do forestry mulching on that area. And normally I've been a big fan of using an excavator to come in and pluck the trees out. However, at least here in Tennessee, the state water control board that issues the permits wants undisturbed land, and it's kind of a fine line of whether plucking trees out is disturbing the land or not. A better way, according to the state, would be to mulch the area. Leave the root balls in place, leave the stumps in the ground. Mulch the trees down to clear it out so the excavators can work. So next question, I have some RV sites here that are up on a ridge, and there's some trees growing, blocking what I would consider a nice view. You'd be able to see the other ridge top, a half a mile or quarter mile away. So I want to, clear trees from the view. They're not in the driveway, they're down deep in the hollers. So what method would you use to open up the view? This is a little tricky one. Number one, again, I would use the chemical method on any root suckering trees that I'm going to be taking down or obstructing my view. Probably not too many in this type of scenario. Probably what I would do, it's, the area is probably too steep for a track hoe to get in there, or a bulldozer, and that would take out too much anyway. Typically, if you're going to clear a view, you don't want to clear cut it. You just want to take out a few trees that are blocking the view. I mean, you still want trees down there. You don't just want just barren land to look at. So I would probably go down there with a chainsaw and cut those trees down, and either harvest them for firewood or just leave them to decay and complete the circle of life, if you will. Next question: how do I get rid of root suckering and vines? Even Tarzanian vines, the kinds like you can swing from in the jungle. I got some of those here too. How do I get rid of those? So root suckers we've talked quite a bit about. We haven't really talked about vines at all. And there's two kinds of vines. There's the smaller vines that are more of a nuisance for walking through the woods, and then there's the vines that climb up a tree that are called Tarzanian lines, like Tarzan swings. A lot of these vines and Tarzanian vines that go up trees, have a single sprout coming out of the ground. So what I read is you cut off the vine 6 inches off the ground or so, and then you use a chemical called glyphosate. It's a common chemical you'll find in Roundup. It's a non-selective chemical, and then as soon as you cut the vine off, you just take a paintbrush and just paint that stump with the glyphosate. So I have a hard time saying that word. And then that supposedly will take care of the vines. And there are a lot of videos out there, so I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail on it, but that's the answer to that question. Here's the final question of the quiz. If I want to make some ATV or UTV paths through my woods, what would be the best method to clear trees and vegetation for that? Again, I would identify root suckering and vines and treat those first, wait 30 days, and then I would forestry mulch those areas. It would be, there's a lot of underbrush typically to be cleared, and I would use a forestry mulching method for that. I'd leave the stumps in because I can drive over those with ATVs, UTVs, unless you want a smooth path that you're going 100 miles an hour down. A little bumper here or there from a stump isn't gonna be a big deal. So that's that's my, again, this quiz was all my opinion from my experience, things that I've gathered. If you have other recommendations or some advice or criticism, concerns, just let me know in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.